Hello. Oh, you since you're, I'll worry about my camera since you're getting close.
Well, we are live. It didn't have the button, I guess, because it as soon as it got the live stream, it just went live.
I got you. All right. Well,
hello everybody. Welcome to the Apologeeks channel. We're trying to start the Preston Stirred episode number 6 about biases, and we are still getting set up. YouTube seems to have changed a little something. We don't know. Normally we have a little warning before we go live, and today it just went live. So here we are. Thanks for joining the Apologeeks channel. This is where Jason and David geek out on apologetics. Our Preston Stirred live show is a live show every morning at every Saturday morning at 8:30, where we pick one topic and we just geek out for about an hour, hour and a half. If you know people who geek out on apologetics, please share this video. Or if you are an apologeek, go ahead and like this video and subscribe below. This morning, we're talking about biases. And we'll start that here in a moment, but I think David is almost ready. Yeah. It looks good. It looks good. We are, as you've probably seen, if you watch any of our other videos, my background keeps changing because we are trying to figure out where on a Saturday morning I should live stream from, because normally it's my office and we are not allowed to go to my office. Trying different areas of my house. Today we're in the kitchen with We Are Truly Blessed behind me. That's my new background for this week, so we'll see how this works. David, how you doing this morning, man?
I'm doing great now that I'm here. So, how's my audio?
Your audio sounds good. Could be bumped a little bit, but I have no idea how loud I am. So I might be screaming at people and people can barely hear you. I'm not sure. Well, we always want to start the episode with a prayer. And I believe David started last week, so I will go ahead and pray us in this week. Father God, thank you for the opportunity to come together and discuss how we can share our faith in you, Lord. Give us your words. Let your wisdom be spread throughout this message. If there's anything that's selfish or not of you, please let that fall flat or stop it in our mouths to where we don't say it. Please open our minds, open our hearts, and let us show why we believe in you, that we trust that you are our Father, and that we do that not only with our emotions, but with our minds. We strive to love you with our entire mind, soul, and spirit, Lord. And we ask all of this in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, David. So this week's subject, biases, is kind of closely tied to last week's subject, vernacular. And I wanted to start out with your sideways. I wanted to start out with asking you, do you think that you're biased coming into this conversation?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, most definitely. But that doesn't mean that I don't, I let it hinder me in accomplishing what I need to accomplish and listening to other people. Listening first, we've been talking about listening to other people since the beginning. And, it's simple enough to listen to them. But now, whenever you internalize and actually think about what they're saying, you need to understand your own biases to be able to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, and I think we're going to pretty quickly get to the, like most episodes, it's kind of easy to sum up because we tend to pick one subject and talk about that for a bit and give significant examples of it. So we often kind of get to the point right away. And the point is, there's no such thing as people who are unbiased. There's no such thing as pure objectivity. Every single one of us has had experiences, a lifetime full of experiences. We've read different books. We've talked to different people, had different conversations. there's no such thing as unbiased. It's absolutely childish to think I'm an completely objective person, or I can be completely objective about a subject. Whenever I broach a subject, or you broach a subject, I come to that subject with a lifetime full of information that I think I know about that subject. And to think that I'm unbiased is naive at best. And so the goal is not to be unbiased. That's what most people, I'm going to try to be as unbiased as possible, or I'm going to try to be as objective as humanly possible because I want to be like a robot. And that just doesn't work. It's better to understand our biases, especially when we're in a conversation, understand our own biases and understand the biases of our partner in conversation. And then we'll be able to have useful and workable conversation, taking into consideration our biases. What do you think, David?
Live stream over. just like normal.
Just like most every live stream, yeah. We could just cut it off right now. All of our people who talk to us that don't like it. We have, I personally have quite a few friends and family who aren't long form content people. And so they would be happy if we just cut it right there and go, that's it. That's the nugget. Take it. But I think that this is a logical next conversation to have after having the conversation about vernacular. Last week, we talked about vernacular and setting up the conversation and how we're going to use. Now we need to understand not only what the definition of the words we're using are, but all the baggage that are attached to words. I was watching a debate earlier this week, and it was atheist versus Christian, and the atheist had a great point that he was saying that every time you use the word God, there's so much baggage attached to that word for almost anyone. There's so many experiences and just the way that their family used it, the way that if they've been experienced with church or not, the books they've read, all of the theological or philosophical conversations that they've had, all of that comes packed along with that little 3-letter word. And every time you say that 3-letter word, they have all of that. Their brain encompasses all of that biases to try to hear that word. I think, do you have anything before I move on a little bit, David?
I've never really been a big fan of using that word outside of circles where everyone knows what it means. So I've, like in God we trust as our national motto. There's a lot of times, most of the time a lot of the times when the word God is used by itself on purpose, it's done that way to be inclusive rather than exclusive. And even if you're not meaning it that way, other people can hear it that way, especially atheists and whatnot. So, it's important to be specific. A lot of times I say God of the Bible or the God of Abraham, things of that nature whenever when I'm in a situation where I could use just God, just to, if I can't get rid of all the baggage, I can at least get the specific baggage I want, or at least should be attached.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the issues I often see when people are talking about God, especially in debates, is that exactly what you said. They don't kind of define, and that goes back to vernacular, but you're talking God of Abraham or God of the Bible versus just God. When I watch debates where Christians are trying to prove God versus an atheist or something like that, often they'll start most apologists will start with one of the major proofs for God, and one of the most popular right now, probably because of William Lane Craig uses it so effectively, and it's a powerful argument for God would be the Kalam cosmological argument. And when you're done with the Kalam cosmological arguments, which basically we're not going to cover, we will cover that on this channel, just not in full today. Basically says that everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe, time, space, and matter began to exist, and thus they have a cause. That cause, nothing can't cause everything, but the cause, which the cosmological argument says, is something that is, since it can't cause itself, the cause has to be immaterial because of matter, outside of time and outside of space. And so basically, and to make the choice to create something, we can further say that logically, God would have to have a personality or be able to make the choice, free will, libertarian free will, to make the choice to create everything, which leaves you with a creator. And so often what I'll see in a debate is a Christian will go with that Kalam cosmological argument and say, look, okay, everything that began to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, thus it has a cause. That cause has to be immaterial, outside of time, space, matter, and has to have a personality. So we're left with a creator God, but that's it. That's all we're left with. And then the arguments, because of all the baggage that comes along, often the arguments from the other side tend to go straight to the God of the Bible. And the God of the Bible has not been established yet in that argument. Established a person that is outside of time, space, and matter, that is omniscient. We haven't even gotten to omnibenevolent yet, just omniscient, omnipotent, and so all powerful and all knowing. But we haven't created the Christian God yet, and all of a sudden we're already arguing about the Christian God. And so that's a very strong biases to jump straight to what you consider God in an argument like this. And so it creates frustration, and it creates confusion, I believe, when you bring all that baggage. And we're just talking about one word, but the point is that 3-letter word is so packed with baggage that often, unless you say, right now I'm talking about a creator, I'm not even going to use the word God, I'm using the word creator. That's what the Kalam cosmological argument proves logically. And so you can't even really use the word God, because creator is an easier way that has less baggage to have that conversation with someone, because you haven't established the God that they even think that they're arguing against yet.
Right. I think that just a very quick statement about that argument. The fact that the creator can't be created isn't arbitrary. It kind of jumps to the universe and space and time, but if you start with humans or an ant or a plant, anything, and just go backwards of how it could have happened, you eventually, no matter where you start, end up with who created the uncreatable, and so that ends up being the atheists, they have the Big Bang. So the Big Bang created the uncreatable. It was just a Big Bang. And so, and then as soon as they say, well, it's a cycle and the Big Bang can then, collapse or bang again, then, or the big squish and then the Big Bang, what they do now, that they lose their creator. And so then they have to say, well, how did that cycle get started? What set that in motion? And so every time they try to get away from it, you end up with someone or something had to create it. And if it had to create it, then all those properties, those characteristics start coming out. Well, they had to be all knowing. They had to be, they had to have all these godlike qualities and to be uncreated and omniscient. And so the God of the Bible gets defined by creation by his creation, just like he said that he would. But that's the reason that argument's so effective is because that if you logically follow any part of creation back to as small and as early as you can get, you get to the point where something has to be created.
Right. And well, you get to the point where there has to be a creator that was not in and of himself created.
Right.
You get to the point of an uncreated creator, or uncaused cause. And it's funny because when you watch William Lane Craig use this effectively, and some other, I saw Braxton, what is his name? I don't know. The guy from Trinity University. Really, really good debater. I've watched a couple of his debates now. And when they use it effectively, most atheists will try to stop at the Big Bang and go, well, we just don't know anything before that. Like anything, and you're going, well, what created all the matter that was in the Big Bang? And they're like, not going to go that far. But once you actually get them to go, no, that had to be created somehow. I've watched one of William Lane Craig's interlocutors.
Interlocutors.
Well, actually, real quick, sidebar. I used that word wrong last week. I didn't use it wrong in definition. It's one of those words I read a lot. And most of my initial study on philosophy, psychology, theology, any of that stuff was done myself with reading. And so there are words sometimes that you read and you hear it in your head and it just becomes a thing in your head. And I probably read that word hundreds, if not thousands of times before I ever heard someone say the word. And in my head, the word, but that's not even how it's spelled. It's spelled T-E-R at the end. And it's pronounced with a D-E-R at the end instead of an L-A-R, whatever you would say, interlocular. It's actually interlocutor. But it's spelled like interlocutor. But like I said, I read that word thousands of times, and in my head, it was just interlocular before I ever heard anyone actually speak the word. And so usually in a conversation, if I get it right the first time, if I actually say interlocutor, I'll say interlocutor every time. But if I get it wrong the first time, it's just because so long that's the word that I heard in my head, I end up going with it. So it is not interlocular, and I understand that. It is interlocutor. I just have a hard time saying that. Anyway.
That's happened to me many times, and it's happened to a lot of other people too. So it's so common that there's a saying, if you hear someone mispronounce a word, never make fun of them because that means they read it.
That's true. Yeah. So William Lane Craig, Braxton Hunter, by the way, is the name of the guy from Trinity University, which I will probably go to Trinity University, I think, if I ever continue on my plan to have a doctorate in philosophy. When they bring people to the point where they actually look past or before the Big Bang, look back in the future past the Big Bang, they basically come to the same conclusion, that there was a creator outside of time and space and matter. But what they tend to do, I watched William Lane Craig once call it one of his interlocutors call it a robot. Well, why couldn't it have been a robot or a program? And he goes, okay, but basically you've just described God and then called him a robot. That doesn't change anything. You know, I've heard another one call it I think it was Matt Dillahunty called it a pixie at one point. Well, why couldn't it have been a pixie that did or a bunch of pixies, I think. And then you go, okay, well, a bunch of pixies, once you continue that process back, you'd end up with one pixie that's outside of space, time, and matter, that's omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent. And so basically you're just describing God and calling him a pixie. Like, you end up coming to the same definition when you use that term. So anyway, that was a huge rabbit trail talking about biases, which didn't seem to go that way. But so earlier in the week, I got a really interesting email from somebody in my church, and he was asking the question, do we look at the Bible with lenses? And what he really meant was do we look at the Bible with biases, or do we try to look at it objectively? And my response to him in the email was, everybody looks at everything through lenses. If you don't think you have lenses on, then you're not intellectually honest with yourself. It is a dangerous place to be, to think that I am looking at any subject with no lenses, with no biases. It's a dangerous place. You become unteachable. You become Arun Ra, who is an internet atheist and thinks that he is always right. I've watched so many videos where he's just like, I am truth. Basically, he doesn't say that out loud, but he basically thinks, I am truth. I'm right all the time. And that is such a dangerous place to be. The arrogance of many intellectuals, honestly, but many humans altogether, on how much we think we know is astounding. Our lack of knowledge in any area, I don't care what area you're talking about, our lack of knowledge, not only individually, but as a human race, our lack of knowledge is so overwhelming. We have so much to learn, and anyone who feels like they think they know that they know already has a bias, and most likely that person works in confirmation bias, which we'll talk about more in a different episode. Almost all the time, they're basically, they think they already have all the answers, and so they only allow information that line up with their biases. And if you bring any information, data to that goes against that, you're just wrong. Why? Because they're right. That's the answer. That means in their mind, that's the whole reason you're wrong, not because you're logically or evidentially wrong, but that they're right. And so anything you bring can be wrong. And I don't want it to sound like I'm saying we can't be sure about what we believe. I am one of the most sure people about my faith system. And it's because I've tested it over and over and over. And every time I've logically tested it or looked at evidence, it comes back to the same, the God of the Bible. And so I'm very, very strong in my faith. But do I think I know everything? Do I think that when I watched a debate and they asked last night, it was Braxton Hunter from Trinity University and Matt Dillahunty. And one of the question and answer times was, what could convince you, or could you be convinced otherwise? And Matt Dillahunty, being very honest, said, I don't know what would convince me, because I don't know what I don't know. And Braxton Hunter basically said the same thing, but he said, I've tried this before, and I've already been convinced. But yes, there could be some information that I don't know that could change my mind. And we always have to be at that point. I'm not saying change your mind. I'm saying understand the limitations of your own knowledge base and your own understanding of the world.
I think the story of the rich man and Lazarus has an interesting parallel here with that question, because Lazarus asked for someone from the dead to go and talk to his family members, and they're like, they've got Moses and the prophets. If they don't believe them, someone coming back from the dead will not convince them.
Yeah. And it just shows the power of bias. What would convince you? Same debater, Matt Dillahunty, has said in the past that if a comet hit the moon and the dust from the destruction, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, I believe, if a comet hit the moon and the dust from the destruction spelled out in several languages, including Hebrew and Greek, I am God, or that God exists, he still wouldn't be able to admit that actually was God. That wouldn't convince him. He would at least think, ooh, there's something that we don't understand.
That seems a lot more unexplainable than someone coming back from the dead.
Yeah. And so, the question is,
so he just admitted that God was right all along.
Right. And here's another bias that I do want to talk about. We've talked several times on this channel about the fact that we are three-part beings. that we have a body, a physical body, a soul, which is our mind, will, emotions, thoughts, feelings, and dreams, and we have our spirit, which is the essence of who we are, and it's our connection to eternity. And we have laws in all of those areas, those worlds that we live in. The physical world has the natural world has laws. The law of thermodynamics. We have the law of gravity. We have these laws in the physical realm that we have to abide by, and we've talked about we have laws in the logical realm that we abide by. That actually we had a whole episode on that. What is truth, right? And these laws that help us understand reality. And then we have spiritual laws, which we believe are in the Bible and that are just as powerful and just as real as the law of gravity or the second law of thermodynamics. So what I often see is that biases for atheists, and not only atheists, we're going to pick on atheists a lot because it's
so easy. I'm kidding.
It's so easy. We're going to pick on atheists because it's so darn easy. No, we're going to pick on atheists because it's the first spot, right? Like, it's the thing that separates us from another group the most. Mm-hmm. It's the first question. Were we created, or do we exist? Have we always existed? Did somebody create us? Is there a God? That's the first question that often has to be answered, and it shows the dichotomy of our belief against somebody else's belief. So it's the easiest to pick on because it's the furthest from our belief system. So often when you're talking to an atheist and they're saying, you have to give me evidence of God. You have to give me evidence. It's always about the physical world. And we've already talked about there are logical fallacies and logical laws. Often the laws that we use to prove God, the Kalam cosmological argument that we just talked about, that is a rational, logical law, and it's proof just as much as physical. But often atheists have a bias against, they're not going to like that I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Often atheists have a bias against logic and reason because they only want physical evidence. They only want to be able to point at something and go, there's God. See, I proved it. I finally can touch and feel. Why doesn't God just show up right now and touch so I can touch and feel and see him and experience him? And they completely ignore the rational, intellectual realm and all of this logic. And most of the arguments are in logic. And there's a good reason for that. And we can give that away right now. We have free will. It's one of the most important things about our existence that God gave us free will to either choose to believe in him, choose to love him, choose to follow him. And if I could, there are some people who would be like, man, I wish God would just come down right now and show himself to anybody who chooses to watch this so that everybody would know that God exists. And that would be really cool. No, because no longer would any of us have free will. If God shows up, our free will is gone. Gone. You will not have a choice in whether to believe in God or not. He's taken away one of the greatest gifts that he gave us, which is free will, if he shows up physically. So what did he do? Does that mean we don't have physical evidence for God? No, I believe that the scriptures are correct when they say that all nature declares the glory of God. Like, all nature. And if you look at it and you have the worldview that there is a creator and that there is design and that the reason that there's patterns in the universe is because there's a designer to design those patterns, they all point back to God. And so there are physical laws or physical evidence of God, but most atheists won't take that because they say, no, I want my evidence. You have to prove it in my way. And they completely ignore, they have a bias against all the rational and logical evidence for God because, well, I don't know. I can't say why they have a bias against it. There's many, many reasons. Each person has a different reason for their bias against logic?
Yeah, the oftentimes you'll get, well, I, when I was reading into how we know what we know, there was a lot of, and we quote oftentimes a fairly recent idea as far as it being said in, concisely in one sentence in a law type form of scientific theory has to be falsifiable before it can be considered, because unfalsifiable theory can't be tested, right? So there's disagreement on that. There's, we've had the scientific method for a long time, and those two go hand in hand. Both of those have been, especially in recent times, derided, and the idea of deductive reasoning kind of looked down upon for that very reason, the bias against logical, against reason. And so what they want is they just want physical evidence. Well, they build a bunch of exclusions on top of it. It's not just any physical evidence. There's plenty of, just the mere existence of our physical laws is evidence in itself. There's a lot of different things that don't evolve. Everything's supposed to evolve, but these things don't. I thought for a long time there was no such thing as an evolutionary mathematician. And there actually isn't, in the sense that what I'm talking about. But there are some people that actually call themselves evolutionary mathematicians, but it's not at all the evolution of numbers. So we didn't start off with 1 and then get a 2, and then a few million years later, a 3. Those are logical concepts, but why do we have, certain constants in the universe, certain physical things that we've never observed to change, even with ways that we could test going further, looking back in the past, as far as some people think we can look millions or billions of years into the past. We've never observed these things to change. So they just completely ignore that type of evidence, where there are these massive parts of creation that, if they did evolve, would completely destroy what we have. So it's not just any physical evidence. They're biased against certain particular types of physical evidence, and almost all reasonable or logical evidence, especially if it's deductive reasoning. So and that's been being warred against in earnest in the past 100 years.
Can you tell our viewers the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning? Or do we need a separate? I figured we would end up having a separate episode for that, but can you kind of nutshell it?
I was planning on doing that. I was trying to think of, I just remember deductive reasoning is actually some of the laws that we covered before, some of the logical laws, where if a, I'm trying to remember a good way to put it now, because I wasn't focused on deductive takes physical and evidence and makes reasonable assumptions based on that evidence, whereas inductive, and I may be screwing this up a lot because my mind's not working right now, but inductive is a lot more internal. So you can have, with inductive, you can have, you don't need any sort of, you could actually have contradictions, and you don't need, you can't have, you can't have absolute truth with inductive where you can with deductive.
Right. And that's the big difference, I think, is that deductive reasoning uses premises that are proven, and then automatically, if the premises are correct, then the conclusion automatically is correct as well. So, for example, A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C.
That's what I was trying to recall that right there.
Yeah. So if we can prove that A equals B, and with deductive reasoning, you have to ensure that you have proven the premises. So if we can make sure that A equals B, and we know that for sure, and we can prove that B equals C, we know that for sure, then it is a logical certainty that A equals C.
Yeah.
With inductive reasoning, we have parts of evidence. And so often the conclusion out of an inductive argument or inductive reasoning, it ends up not being as certain, but it's probable. And I think that's what we're saying, is that oftentimes naturalists, atheists, secular humanists, different people of that bent will is if it doesn't fit what they the biases that they already hold, that they think they know are true. And so when you bring a deductive argument to them, sometimes lots of times they will flounder back and forth, struggling, or they'll just change the subject because they don't like the logical law. So often you'll give like a deductive argument that's logical, and then they'll be like, show me the proof. Like, I can't see it. I can't prove it. And you're like, do I need a whiteboard? And if I write it on a whiteboard, does that make it shown? Because this is logic. It's not nature. We live in more than one realm. We have logical laws and natural laws, and you keep asking me to answer a logical argument with a natural example or a natural evidence. And that doesn't make sense. And it's often the big issue with the does God exist? And especially with people who are believe in scientism or believe that science is the only way to know the truth. And you're going, okay, but even the statement science is the only way to know the truth is a logical assertion. And so can you prove logically that science is the only way to know the truth? Can you prove that scientifically? No, there's no scientific experiment that we can run to prove that science is the only way to know truth. And so it ends up being this almost, instead of circular reasoning, circular unreasoning, right? I'm trying to argue with you about a logical proof, but you have to give me scientific, physical, natural evidence for it. And that does not make sense, which I think also, this is kind of a side note. When I do watch debates of atheists and Christians a lot, and the cosmological argument is used, I think one of the vernacular issues that we have with the cosmological argument is where we start. We say everything that begins to exist has a cause. Well, first, there's an atheist argument that says, oh, that's the new Kalam cosmological argument, by the way, because it used to say that everything has a cause. But then we'd end up with this circular reasoning of, well, if everything has a cause, then what is the cause of God? So we changed it to everything that exists, everything that begins to exist has a cause. And now we can stop it at God and say, but he didn't begin to exist. Oh, so that's so easy. And we're kind of using this out. And I think it's the vernacular and the biases against that argument that people struggle with. And so the first time I ever read the argument was actually with Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas, when he presents these types of arguments, he bases it not only in logic, but also in nature. And so what he says is, everything we observe in nature that begins to exist has a cause. That vernacular changes the argument significantly, because now we're saying not only are we in this like logical realm that we can't see or experience anything, but we're saying all of our experience, every time, in all of our physical, natural experience, what we observe is that things that begin to exist have a reason. They have a cause for beginning to exist. There is not a single example in all of nature of something that began to exist that did not have a cause. I think that makes the argument much more powerful because we've cleaned up the vernacular. It's our observation that leads to the logic. So we're joining the natural and the logical realms with that type of argument. And so I've even seen it actually used that way, and the biases of the atheists were so heavy against the Kalam cosmological argument that they didn't even hear the difference. They didn't even hear the difference of everything we observe. Everything you have ever observed in your entire life had a cause. Everything. And so once you put it that way, you say, you cannot give me a single example of something that you have observed that did not have a cause. What this really points out is the fact that to believe that there is not a cause for the Big Bang, you have to go against everything you have observed. It has to be the one exception in all of your life. Everything since you were a child that you have observed has a cause. And now you're going to say, oh, but this one thing, it's my one exception. And it really points out that you're making my one exception this thing because I have this bias that I don't want there to be a God.
Which is why they invented the multiverse. But then that just gets around to, and that's the cycles and everything happening. You know, it could happen over again, or it's happening in multiple places. But that just adds more, that just muddies the water to try to hide the fact that it's all that still needs a cause.
Yeah, because all it's doing is pushing further back our eventual getting to the point where there's a cause for everything, all time, matter, and space. And so time, matter, and energy. And so the idea is that we should have named this one the Kalam cosmological argument, and we really haven't delved into it, but we've used it a lot. It's been our example. So we're saying all time, matter, and space. And what happens is people go, but there's multiple. Now there's multiple, and that makes it to where there's more options. Okay, but let's shrink that back down to all universes, multiverses. Where did that begin? Like, that's all they're doing is expanding it to try to push away the edges that we have to get to say at some point time, matter, and space began. And because everything else we have observed in our entire experience says that things that begin to exist have a cause for their beginning, we still have to get to that beginning and go, something outside of time, space, and matter, something immaterial, and something that can choose a personality caused all of this. I mean, you eventually get back to it, and you can continue to try to push it further back. Well, multiverses. Well, what if we're inside of a machine that was designed, and so we're actually just kind of like software is what we are. And you know, I think Elon Musk promotes that. I believe, I'm not sure. And so, okay, but who created the software designer? You know, it's always just pushing back. Yeah, who created the programmer? And so it's like, and if you get to the point where the programmer is immaterial, and has no time, space, and matter, then you're describing God and calling him a programmer. That's the whole power of that argument. Is the only way to get through the argument as an atheist is to either try to push away the edges, so we just keep going, no, we're never going to get to the beginning, or we're just going to redefine everything and say that it came from nothing. Is it like it?
Well, and this is where the deductive and inductive things start, and this is where they start going against falsification. This is where they start going against absolute truth, because once you reach that point, you have to get rid of that's what's standing in your way. You got to get rid of those things.
Yeah.
But I do have an idea about how to get us back on track, even though we've covered a bunch of good stuff.
Good.
And that is, we can talk about other people's biases all day long, and we're just going to keep coming up with more examples that we end up bunny trailing. What about we talk about our own?
Okay. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Well, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you can go ahead and start.
So, if we're going to talk about my bias, I have many biases. I start with the idea that everything is created. I didn't always start with that idea. The bias that I have towards there being a creator and me being part of the creation comes through understanding these arguments and going, when I was on the opposite side of the arguments. I haven't really shared my testimony, but this is where we find biases. Honestly, if you want to find people's biases, find out their testimony. I grew up not very religious, but when we did try to pretend to be religious, I don't know what you would call it. We went to church when we did something so bad that we had to go to confession. That's how I grew up. And we went to Catholic church when somebody in the family did something so bad that we had to go to confession. That's primarily the times that we went to church. But when I was 14, something happened in my family that we definitely needed to go to church. It was bad. And we decided not to go to a Catholic church. So we went to a hellfire and brimstone TV evangelist church. And he was preaching on generational sin. And we were at the church because a sin of one of my parents. I don't want to throw their dirty laundry on the internet, but it was, one of my parents. And so the hellfire brimstone preacher he loved to yell, and he was like, you might as well be hammering the nail in your kid's coffin if you're sinning, because they're going to hell. And I'm like, so if my parents are sinning, I'm going to hell. Well, I know how flawed and broken my parents are. I'm not saying I'm any less flawed and broken, but I know how flawed and broken they are. And if I'm going to be punished for them, I've got no hope. No hope whatsoever. There's no point in me being a Christian if what that preacher said was true. So I decided at that point, nope, I'm done. I don't believe in God. I didn't become an atheist right away. Really, what I became is a Jasonist. I just wanted to live for my own pleasure. Like, I was straight up hedonist, right? Just live for your own pleasure. Don't even think about these things. And so that's where I started. And I lived that way for a few years. And then I ran into this part of my testimony gets dicey for anybody who's watching this, who is not a Christian. I want you to understand, or who is an atheist, and in particular, I ran into a group of what I call pseudo-intellectuals. These people talked a good game. I really thought they were like brilliant. And because of the stuff that went on in my childhood and growing up, I never read growing up. I didn't think I was very smart. I was kind of the class clown. I was even told that I didn't have the brains for college. And it didn't have to do with my actual aptitude. It had to do with my home life and the fact that I often went to school hungry and tired and with many, many other things from home on my mind. And so just didn't do much in school. So I didn't think I was smart. I bought it. I was like, oh, I'm not that smart. But whatever. And then I met these people who seemed really smart. Like they talked a good game. They had a reading club, and we started reading like Angela, what is their name? Maya Angelou and Langston Hughes and all these poets and stuff. And then they started moving into philosophy, and we started reading Nietzsche and Kant and Kierkegaard and all this stuff. And what I realized was, like, I really enjoyed the conversation, and I really enjoyed reading these books. And it was the first time I was reading, so I was getting all excited. And then I realized that they basically didn't read the books, and that they were just regurgitating other people's knowledge and opinions and stuff like that. And they wanted to sound so high-minded. And I was like, but did you read it? Because I read it, and I want to talk about it. And like, what you're saying doesn't make any sense. And so I became an atheist at that point. I decided I do not believe that there is a God, primarily because I was angry at God. I looked at evil. Evil was my primary argument against God, the argument that evil exists. And I was honestly very upset at God. And so I was an atheist. I was like, science is everything. I was the guy that we're talking about. I was that guy. Science is the only way to know truth. Science is everything. I'm going to study nature and science, and I'm going to be an atheist, and that's just how it is. And so I started studying science and nature, and it only took me 6 months. I mean, and really not even that long. It took me 6 months to make the decision, but almost immediately studying science and nature, I came to this struggle within my own life. Science and nature is about discovering design, about discovering patterns. And the second law of thermodynamics says that everything is, all pattern is dissipating. And I know I understand that is a paraphrase, but basically it should be getting worse rather than better. And for me, if everything has existed for millions of years, patterns should not be what we should be looking for. The destruction of patterns should be what we should be looking for and expecting. But science is not about expecting destruction or opposite of patterns. It's looking for patterns. And so I began to see all of these patterns on an astronomical scale, on a micro level, on a macro level, on a world level, on an atomic level. Everywhere there are these patterns and designs. And I was like, dude, this isn't happenstance. Like, this is design. I didn't immediately jump to the Christian God by any means, but I believe that looking and seeing all of this pattern and design, there had to be a mind behind it. And it took me about 6 months to say, no, I can't be an atheist anymore. I just can't. There's too, and I came through nature to that example. So I started studying philosophy and psychology along with nature and theology. And so I studied about 26 different religions. So I have my biases. Now, that was a long, before I became a Christian, I studied 26 religions, and then I became a Christian. So my biases tend to be that, one, we don't know much of anything. That's a worldview that I start at. I start at the fact that humans are very ignorant. We're so ignorant that we're scared to even talk about it. And ignorance is not a bad thing. Ignorance does not mean stupid. Ignorance means that we don't know something. And so, like, our knowledge of, let's just say, the oceans, the best oceanographers in the world guesstimate that we have between 3 and 4% knowledge of ocean life and the ecosystem of the oceans. 3 to 4%. 3 to 4% knowledge of something that exists right now and we have access to. Yet we want to act like we have all this knowledge about what happens outside of our solar system or a million years in the past. Like, we are so arrogant because we're so scared to admit our own ignorance. I am a fan of Socrates, who says that the only reason that somebody can consider me intelligent or smart is because I know that I know nothing. We all know nothing. but at least I know that I know nothing. And so that is probably my biggest bias. I'm willing to put any of my ideas on the chopping block because I know that I know nothing. Now, do I hold firm to my Christianity, to my belief in God, to my ideals? Yes, because I continue to test them. But one of my biases is that humans are very, very ignorant.
Yeah, there's a number of natural biases that come out of the Christian worldview. We mentioned, I think, last episode where, just in normal conversation, you don't have the same, you have more peace, you don't have the same fear about anything, world events, anything that could be happening that's causing people to be fearful. And if you talk about them too lightly or without the other people are very freaked out and very scared of death and very scared of to them it's all one big accident and careening out of control and at tens of thousands of miles an hour in multiple directions. So for their status quo to be upset, it's traumatic. And if you don't, with your own biases in place and not thinking about them, you can shut doors whenever you're speaking. This is a little less technical, but it kind of a simplistic example of biases in conversation that I wanted to bring up just for its practicality and maybe understanding of the concept.
Yeah, and actually, we're probably going to have multiple episodes on biases. I don't think our next episode is going to be biases because we're presenting. There's a method to the madness, by the way, of what we pick the topics. And right now, we're going over massive general topics. We will come back around to biases and break it down to specific types and specific examples of biases. And the one that you just mentioned is one of the biases. There's actually the status quo bias, and it means that you lean towards the status quo because that's more comfortable for you. And so if you have two arguments and one of them represents or confirms the status quo, and one of them represents a change in the status quo, we as humans have a natural bias to lean towards the status quo. And so that's actually a formal logical bias, is the status quo bias. That's one of the ones you'll be learning more about when we go on specific biases. But you're absolutely right. And that's a shocking bias to people. And I still, to this day, sometimes, because my biases are so strong, my worldview is so strong in the way that I live it. I don't just talk about this stuff. I believe it 100%. So, for example, right now, those of you who are watching this video in the future, we are in the middle of the coronavirus. And if you're watching this on the other side of the coronavirus, you may remember this time and the fear and panic and terror that's going on. And I have no fear. And that's not me trying to be like, yeah, no, I'm not afraid of the coronavirus. I'm a big man. I have no fear. Like, I believe with everything that is in me that if I get the coronavirus, one, I'm a diabetic, so I'm already high risk. I could die. Like that is a valid option in this whole thing. You might be watching this on the other side of the coronavirus, and Jason may no longer be part of the Apologeeks. That freaks people out that I'm okay with that. But because of my biases, I believe that when I step out of this body, to be absent from the body is to be in the presence of the Lord. And I have no fear whatsoever. I believe in eternity. I believe because of the Kalam cosmological argument, I believe that, yes, time, space, and matter began to exist, which means that there's something outside of time, space, and matter that caused it to exist, which is a God. And that God, you ready? Here it comes. Are you ready? Because we wanted to have the gospel every single episode.
I heard it coming.
I believe that God is a good and loving God. He is and this is another argument that we'll begin to talk about, but I believe that he is the superlative of everything that exists. That's one of Thomas Aquinas's other arguments, that we see gradation in nature, and that because I can see that one thing is better than another, then that presupposes, if one thing is better than another, it presupposes that there's a best, and that best thing is what we call God. He is the best love. God does not love better than everybody else. He is love. It's one of his attributes. God does not have more intellect than everybody else. He is intellect. God does not have more justice than everybody else. He is, in essence, justice. And so I believe that we have a perfect creator God. That creator God created a perfect creation, I believe. Perfect. I know that when you look at it, it doesn't seem that way, but there's been thousands and thousands upon thousands of years that humans have screwed it up, but it began perfect. I believe that exactly what I just said, that humans screwed up that creation, that we are fallen and we are broken and we are sinful, and that we have a sinful nature, and that my flesh wants to sin all the time. And not only does it want to sin, hundreds of thousands of times in my life, I've allowed it to, or I've chosen to. I have created evil in this world. My God created a perfect world, and I have been part of creating evil in that world. Or a better way to put it is creating a lack of God in this world. I'm responsible for that. And the payment for that, I believe the just payment for that is that God should take me out of his creation. He should, if I were God, which I'm not, which is praise God that I'm not, I would think, why did I even make Jason? He has put so much evil in this world, and he has every right to just take me right out of it. And so when the Bible says that the penalty, or that the proper wages for sin is death, I agree with it. I don't just believe it. I agree with it. I agree that Jason should experience death for the evil and pain and hurt and sickness that I have put in this world. 100%. I am guilty. I stand guilty before an almighty and perfect God. I have lied. I have stolen. I have hated people. I have said words that have broken hearts and broken minds. I am an evil, sinless person, and all the good things that I've done are filthy rags in the presence of a perfect God. All of that being said, God is so good that he wanted to have a relationship with me and you. And he didn't want us to receive the wages that we deserve, death. And so what he did for us was come down in human form, in the man Jesus, and allowed his creation to beat and torture him and nail him to a cross and murder him, so that he made the payment for all of my evil. He took all of that payment on me
He fulfilled the law, didn't bring any evil into this world, and was still punished the same as this if he did.
Absolutely. And offered me a gift. And offered you a gift of turning from your sin, of repenting from your sin, and allowing him to come be your Lord and Savior and spend eternity with him. Now that offer is on the table for every single one of you who have not already accepted it. Did he die for your sins? Yes. Did he pay the penalty for your sins? Yes. Is that in effect for you if you have not accepted, repented, and confessed Jesus as your Lord and Savior? No. The work is done, but much like me offering you a gift, if you don't take it out of my hands and you walk away without the gift that I've offered you, you get nothing.
So how do you make this choice? You got to have some sort of free will, right?
You got to have some free will.
That's why God protects it so much, is because of that choice that he died for. I mean, would you protect something that you already died for? Of course. It's very valuable. It's very precious to him because our choice, when we choose him, when we use our will to choose his will willingly, that's what makes all protecting our free will worth all of the sin that we make, because it's an eternal truth. Like, oh, this terrible stuff. Even if we did bring it into this world, it's all so terrible. But we're all eternal beings, and all of these things are not eternal. They're finite. They're temporary, and the decision of an eternal being. One decision of an eternal being greatly outweighs any of this wickedness.
Absolutely. So there's the gospel. Accept the gift, guys. And we're going to move into the second thing that we want to have in every episode. Because you might be watching this. I have now started to truly understand that most of my friends and family don't watch this, which is okay. I don't expect them to. Most of my friends and family are not long form content people. They'll watch the videos that we're going to come out with that are the smaller, cut down versions. I'm cool with that. But I've come to the understanding that most of the people who watch this are not family and friends. The whole point of Pressed and Stirred is that we have been pressed and stirred to bring this exact message of God's salvation, to explain why we believe these things, to give an answer for. That's what apologetic means, to give an answer for why we believe what we believe. And for anyone who's watching this who does not know us, if you want to know more about salvation, you contact
On my side,
family.com.
okay. Wait, hold on a second. It may not have cut out on the live stream, but just in case, that entire part where you said you need to, and then .com is where it picked up again.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can't.
Okay. One of my AirPods died. That's what's happened. That's what happened. What I was saying is, if you don't know us, contact us. Connect with us in the comments section. You can email me at jason@pucel, Pucel, family.com. Personally, if you want to talk about salvation. But the better thing to do would be to go find a Bible-believing church. There are many churches out there. I think you're pretty safe if you stay within most non-denominational, most Baptist, most Bible churches. Go find someone who believes in the Bible and become part of that church. Talk to that pastor about the offer that Christ has given you to live an eternal life with God. And so being a part of a church is quite important. And for those of you who this is your first experience with us talking about this, both David and I were not initially church people. We didn't want to go to church. But God uses his body, his people. He uses them as his hands and feet most of the time through a local congregation.
To preserve our free will, but yet still communicate with us and teach us and sharpen us and move amongst us. Go where other eternal beings have accepted the eternal gift and learn as they learn, and help them and help shoulder their burdens, and humble yourselves before your elders and be leaders for the younger ones, and read your Bibles together.
Yeah. And if you find a perfect church, please don't join that church, because you're going to ruin it. Churches are not perfect because it's filled with broken people. That whole idea of hypocrisy and, oh, churches are full of hypocrites and they just want my money. No. And if they do, if it is truly full of hypocrites who are telling you, don't have sex before marriage, and they're having sex outside of marriage, you need to leave that church. But
Or like that thing you just saw that you sent me a message about touching the screen and garbage like that.
About what?
Where talking about giving
Oh,
healing
yes.
through their screen if they send them money.
Yeah. People who are telling you that they can give you healing for money, or that if you tithe, you get, miraculous powers and you become a level 7 laser lotus in the Christian faith or something. I don't.
Or a little G God to do things. And
Yeah. Like, we're not going to be God. We're not going to become part of God. Go find a Bible believing church. And that will help you more than all the videos that you watch on YouTube, because you will actually be put into work. You'll be actually be used. You will get experiences with the God through the body. You'll get to experience his people. You'll get to experience his love. You'll get to experience his mercy. And a lot of times you will get to experience his patience, because you will be having to deal with other broken people. But it is so vitally important to join a church. So David, what do you think, man? You got anything else to add in?
a tool is most useful out of the box or out of the shed.
Agreed.
You want to be a tool that's used by God. And it is when that happens, first you'll see it happen in other people. You will see broken people, and then you will see God move through those people. And you will wonder how to get that. That's what happens in church.
And you know what? I want to put a challenge out there, because we kind of pick on atheists, and I often hear
It's so
atheists.
easy.
It is. It's so easy. But I hear materialists, especially atheists who are materialists, say, "Show me miracles. Show me. Show me." Go join a church. You may not see God. You will not see God appear in bodily form in a church if that's the miracle you're looking for. But I promise you, daily, God gives miracles, and you will see it in a church most of all, because he is constantly giving to his children small daily miracles.
2 or more are gathered. So if you want to go find God, go where 2 or more are gathered.
Yes. Well, David, I think we've only missed one thing. Your biases. So I'm going to let you finish out the conversation with your biases, and then I'll jump in and interrupt you, because I'm really good at that if I need to add anything else. But if not, then you can lead us out with a prayer.
I've got a lot of biases. I've been saying biases just to remain consistently wrong. I'm just going to keep doing that.
Hey, man, people who don't know, I was talking to somebody last night, actually, that didn't realize that you and I don't live anywhere near each other. We're about 300 miles apart. And they were like, wow, you are? Not only are we 300 miles apart, we're in Texas. So we're allowed to say things in ways that most of you other people don't understand.
Or not allowed to.
We're not allowed to?
No, I said, or they're not allowed to. We are.
Right. Y'all can't say it, but we can say it, And so you may hear us say funny things because we're Texans. We don't carry Texas accents that badly. Some of you may be able to tell, but we're Texans, so we get to say some things that other people don't. Like, I've decided that the internet atheist that is named after an old Egyptian, or named himself after an old Egyptian god, Arun Ra, I'm tired of trying to say that way. So he's just going to be Aaron Ray from now on.
I love it. All right. Well, let me see if I can cover a few. I covered the one that I'd noticed in myself before, where I was not thinking of how other people looked at the world and how scary it might be. So I was biased in my biasness of peace, which sounds weird, but a bias is just a way that you think that causes the the words that you speak and which are the ideas that you're communicating to someone else, to have a built-in assumption. And that built-in assumption can be based on facts. That built-in assumption can be based on, most oftentimes it's based on individual experiences, which can cause a biasness toward absolute truth or reality or not. I would say it's pretty safe to say that we all have a little bit of each. And the worst thing about biasness, they're not all bad necessarily, but when they're bad, they cause miscommunication and misunderstanding. That's the bad thing. That's why we want to understand them, good or bad, is because it impacts the way we communicate. And not so much what we're saying, but what we're saying, how it is heard. And so we start off talking about the word God, and then we got into biases inside of other people's heads that cause our words to be meaningless or mean something completely different to them. So, but on our side, when I've got this idea, this we should do the X, and then I lay out because WYZ. Well, X, the whole idea of X is completely terrifying, no matter what WYZ is, because my assumption is that we can deal with X because we're not scared of anything, because of except God. In creation, we're not being pushed by the media or anyone else who's trying to manipulate us through fear. Ideally, because when you fear the Lord, everything else just seems not so bad. It can't impact us near as much. And God and the God that we fear is in control of it all. And we accept that his ideas and his justice are the best, even if it involves what we wouldn't like on the surface. So we become okay with what other people fear, because if it happens, we know it was decided by someone with more information than us, and we trust and love that person because they showed their love for us in the most true loving way. So that was just to cover one bias, to explain it more deeply, to understand, because a peaceful bias has just sounded weird. It sounded like that didn't mean anything really.
Right.
So I hope it does now. So, but other biases, you could have, and this one, this is where, you can kind of see it as what you talked about before, where people trying to be like jelly and not being able to be nailed down. So they change certain things about themselves, or it may seem that way. There may be some instances where people are truly doing that, but they aren't truly doing it in a malicious way. They were trained that way.
Right.
And that's actually a rescuing device that they use to keep themselves sane, because they're holding two conflicting ideas that they're and that goes back to the trilogy Francis Schaeffer, where these guys are, when you hold two conflicting ideas, it's no fun. And so anyway, you being aware of your own biases is to make sure that you hear the other person, what they're really saying. So I can in the past, well, even today, I can disregard, just as an atheist might disregard something I say because it's loaded with words that trigger a lot of their biases that cause actually there are some people that purposely try to build biases in people that do this very thing. that neutralize or change the meaning of other words that other people want to talk to them about. That because they want to neutralize them against a certain conversation or crowd. And that's actually, the devil does that a lot. But you can see people that have chosen to be his tools use that same method as well. But so you want to get past that. You want to be able to, one, hear what the other person is saying, what they're saying, not just the words. The words are the wireless communication of ideas between physical bodies. And their idea is what they may not be a great communicator for whatever reason. They may, there's lots of different reasons. It could be their fault, or it could be on purpose, or it could be not their fault, I'm saying necessarily, or it could be malicious and on purpose. So either way, you want to hear what they're really saying. And then when you respond to that, you want to be able to speak in a way that gets past their biases and really gets to the root of it. And sometimes that's simplifying it. I've found that whenever my kids ask me questions about complicated issues, the way that God gave me to explain to them is actually a great way to explain it to other people and adults, because it bypasses a lot of biases. But and then other times it'll be upon reflection of a discussion that I've had before where I'm like, oh, they were really saying this, or what they think I said was completely the opposite of what I was actually saying. I actually stood up one time and said something in front of everyone in church, and I was calling for everyone to be united. And some people heard that I was wanting to split the church and leave it.
Wow.
So there's not necessary to get into the details on that, although it is kind of eyebrow raising how that could happen. But that happens within the church. Now imagine talking to someone with a completely different worldview.
Yeah.
So
hey, do you mind if I take a moment to put some meat and bones on this? I think we've talked very generally. We've been doing kind of universals and generals. I as you were talking, I was analyzing myself and trying to look at biases that I could be very, very blatant and self-deprecating in a way, but it's not self-deprecating, it's honesty. I have a bias because of my testimony. You heard my testimony. Because of those pseudo-intellectuals that I met, I have a bias against certain pseudo-intellectual conversation. And specifically, the bias of when I see someone who I think is not introspective or does not have a valid, a healthy understanding of their own ignorance. When I hear people say things like, I'm right, rather than, and this is the specific bias. When I'm in a discussion with someone and they talk about them, Jason's right on this, rather than this is the idea that's right. This thing over here, we've got an idea we're talking about, and that is right. Rather than that, they say, I'm right. I have a bias against that, people who use that type of vernacular and who use that mind frame of I'm right. And it affects me in the way. So I was trying to be very introspective myself and say, well, how does that affect the way that I approach a person who may do that thing that I'm biased against? And the truth is, if I'm in a informal debate, well, and even sometimes formal debates, or less often when I'm in just regular conversation, but I will still do it. I tend to move to the conversation, my side of the conversation, to breaking down that person's faith in themselves. So I stop talking about the whatever subject, the thing, I stop talking about that. And I start talking about the ignorance of man and the ignorance of you, so that you get to a point where, or I try to anyway, get you to a point where you understand how ignorant you are. And that's a bias I have. As soon as I hear it, my whole brain goes, they think they can't learn anything. So there's no point in even discussing this, because really they think they can't, that I can't change their mind at all, or they can't change my mind. Like it becomes fruitless, the conversation. And so that biases of mine, when I hear that a person who takes that certain type of vernacular that says, I'm right, I know, my bias makes me start attacking that person rather than attacking the idea. And I'm very against attacking people. I would prefer to attack an idea, right? But to my own detriment sometimes. That's where my biases lead me, is that I have a bias against people who don't understand their own ignorance. And it immediately becomes the most prevalent point in a conversation for me if I care to even start the conversation. The other response to that is, there's no point in having this conversation. I can't wait till it's over. Go ahead and say what you got to say, because you're not going to learn anything from me. And now that you've said that you're right, you are the owner of truth, that you're right, I don't even want to talk to you. So go ahead and finish what you're saying, because I'm not listening anymore. And those are both flaws. That's why I wanted to use one that is flaws in me. But honestly, my nature is, if you say you're right, I've either shut down or I want to attack you till you realize that you are not the holder of truth. Your ideas may be right, but rarely ever are we right.
I'm not that. We've covered several definitions of bias, I think, and they're all true.
Well, and remember, we are going to go back and get more specific. We are being very, very general right now. And so, because bias can mean everything from just a leaning towards, from your experience, to an unnecessary favoring of something because of your prejudice. And I think we've covered many shades in between those definitions. And so, but we'll go back and we'll be specific about specific types of logical biases in a different show. But if we were to do that in one show, I think it would be like a 6-hour show. And I don't got 6 hours. I don't think you can stay up for another 6 hours.
No, I don't plan on it. But while you threw that out there, I'll throw out, this is we're kind of on pet peeves here almost, but it does create probably multiple biases in our, like, I think that actually covered several, that one phrase caused a handful of actions on your part that changed the way that unless you just shut down the conversation completely. That's just one. So on my side, I have a very similar reaction to you, almost everything you said. And I don't know, this is not, I'm not going to use a number of years, but it's odd that I've heard it the same number of years every time I've heard it. And I've heard it many more times than I thought I ever would. But somebody gave me being completely serious, their answer to my question was that they were right because, quote, I have taught it this way for X number of years. That made it true. And I just sat back. It was like at that university in the previous video where I was talking to an older professor in her 60s and then a freshman. Together, they were in agreement on relative everything. And that's wonderful. Oops. See if I can get rid of that. How much that you hear? Probably too much. There's a phone ringing. So Are you there?
Yeah, you're a little harder to hear now.
Okay. What about now?
That's much better.
Okay. So when they say that, it reminded me of the university deal where they said everything's relative, and I said, "Are you absolutely sure about that?" Because they said there's no absolutes, and they popped right back immediately. Oh yeah, I'm absolutely sure about that. They completely both
Right.
the 19-year-old and the 62-year-old, both just that quick. And then I looked at them and raised my eyebrows, and they were like, "Well, except that one," like almost in unison. And I was like, "They're the consistent." Anyway, so the idea that someone could think that was okay just blows me away. The same way that, well, this is right because I've taught it this way for X number of years.
Yeah.
It really just shuts down everything for me because I have a similar feeling that you described.
Right. And
And
so
we never want to do that to someone else.
exactly. And the point that like we began was that biases, we're not saying don't have biases. Actually, we began the thing by saying we all have biases. What we're saying is we can better understand ourselves and our interlocutors when we understand the biases, when we seek to understand the presuppositions and the different levels of biases that each of us brings to the table, we can have better communication. And that's the whole point in all of this, is to have better communication so we can better give an answer for why we believe what we believe.
Yeah, whenever you are crafting your words or changing what's going so when you speak, right before you speak, a lot of times the words go through your mind. If you are slowing that down and pulling words out because of the way someone else thinks, a bias they have, then you're doing what we want you to do. You're thinking about their biases, you're thinking about your biases, and you're adjusting for it to improve communication.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's enough on the general biases. So you ready to move into the specific? No, I'm just kidding. Are you ready to close us out with prayer?
We covered at least two specifics a piece.
Yeah. And and like I said, there will be more. We may even go as far. We got all the time in the world. Well, we may not. We may not have any more time. Who knows? But we're going to take it methodically, and we're going to take one subject at a time, and we may end up with a Preston Stirred episode for each individual formal biases. Who knows? I don't plan that. I plan on getting through the big topics and then going back and being more specific and going back and being more specific. So that'll come down the line. But if you have any questions about biases, if you have any questions about if you feel that we haven't been clear or any of that, there's nobody participating in the live chat right now, but we still do go back and look at the comments after this video is posted. So please post your comments below, share this video, and let us know what you think about biases. Do you personally have biases? Do you understand this idea of why we need to be able to understand ours and the people who we speak to, their biases, to make for better communication? So thank you for joining us this Saturday morning on Preston Stirred. David is going to finish us out on a prayer, and we hope to see you next Saturday at 8:30 Central Daylight Time.
Thank you, Jason. Dear Father, hallowed be thy name. Thank you for all your many blessings and all your many provisions that we don't even recognize most often. Thank you for bringing us here and letting us speak about our experiences and trying to communicate your words and your truth to other people. Help our words, as rambled as they might be on this episode, help other people, help our words be a help and not a hurt. Thank you for giving us this time together. Thank you for this time with my brother Jason. And we thank you for all your care and mercy and your decisions and in our lives and your protection of our free will to choose you. And we ask all these things in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, David. We will see you next Saturday.